Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse across the state of Alabama. The attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis, Wright, and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday evening. For the next half hour, we have a panel of experts to address a specific concern. Our topic of conversation tonight is special education in Alabama. So if you know someone who this topic relates to them and where they are, would love for you just to call them and say, hey, there's a show on right now you need to watch, because it's going to be an extremely informative half an hour, and it's only better whenever you're apart. So call, text, email, that information on the screen all throughout the program. And also just a note, just in case you're new to our program and the way that we do the attorneys, there is an attorney standing by right now to speak with you. So an opportunity to get some free legal advice. Leading our conversation, as he often does, Josh Wright from the firm Hollis, Wright. And we've done 250, close to 300 shows now. And boy, long overdue our subject matter tonight.
No question. This is the first time we've done special education in Alabama. By the way, you killed the intro. That may be one of the better ones you've ever done. I want to watch the show now. In fact, I'm calling all my friends to come watch the show, so good job. You know, I don't know why we've never done one of these shows. I talked with Gina before we kind of got started and said this was the first time we've done special education in Alabama. It's a super important topic that impacts many, many families in our community. And so when we do a show like this, we're going to bring on an expert. And we have done that with Gina Lowe from the Gallini firm, or the Gallini group rather. And just to talk a little bit about this really super important topic. So first of all, thank you for being on the show.
You're very welcome.
How did you get into this area? Because this is not something, people don't go to law school and say, I'm going to go do and be an expert in special education in Alabama. And you've done that, which is a very admirable thing that you do. How did you get involved in it?
Well, I've always been interested in children's rights in different areas. My husband's a pediatric rheumatologist. He's also interested in children. And when I first became a lawyer, I worked with the Department of Human Resources, reuniting children with their families. When I came to Alabama about 5 years ago, I realized that there was just a big need for special education attorneys. There's only approximately 5 of us in the state that practice in this area. There's just a huge need, and we practice all over the state. You know, when families call us and have a need for our services.
And I was going to ask you that. Is it primarily when a family is going through the special education process and something does not go consistent with how they think it should, that they're coming to a firm like yours to have their case evaluated and then to understand what their rights are?
Yes, generally parents that call us have been in the system, in the special education program for many, many years, and they've been satisfied for many years. At some point in time, there's a disagreement that arises. It could be the programming their children are receiving. It could be eligibility. Maybe they have a dispute about eligibility, and they have gone back and forth with the school system to try to work out the differences. And it's not until at some point they ran into a brick wall, they feel like they're not getting anywhere, they call us. Now, we don't immediately jump in and as formal representation. We encourage them to go back to the table, continue to work out the issues, and if they continue to not be able to get anywhere, to give us a call, and then we assess the case to decide if it's appropriate for attorney involvement.
Let's kind of jump off and talk in broad terms. How do you define special education in Alabama? How in general, what is the topic?
So special education, all students with disabilities are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and the acronym for that is FAPE. Children with particular eligibility criteria, they have certain disabilities. Are entitled to an individualized education plan. And that means you're specializing and individualizing their instruction in a school setting.
What are some examples of the types of disabilities that qualify for special education?
So to qualify for special education, which means individualized instruction, specialized instruction, where they're actually modifying your instruction. It's more than just accommodation and adapting the educational environment. A few examples would be autism, other health impairment, which is really a broad category, speech language impaired, you have physical disabilities, orthopedic impairments. There are 13 specific categories that would enable you to become eligible for an individualized education program.
So does state law define what for example, a qualifying disability is and whether or not somebody qualifies in the first place?
Yes, it's actually federal law.
Okay.
It's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, and the state interprets the federal law. So the state is required to provide at a minimum what the federal code states. But states can also offer more than what's minimally required under the federal statutes.
Got a question here. How do I find out if my child is eligible for special education services?
So school districts have a obligation to find students who may be eligible, who are potentially in need of specialized instruction. And it doesn't matter if these students are being homeschooled in private schools. They have the ultimate duty to seek out and find these students. Now, parents also can request through their school systems to have their child identified and evaluated for special education.
Yeah, I know, for example, we've got my youngest who is in speech, and he qualifies still at this stage in second grade. And it's been a really, really great process for us. And he's learned a lot, and he's getting better, and now he can enunciate R's and S's better than he ever could before. But you look at it, and then he's got people in his class that have much more significant disabilities that are dealing with those. And I just wonder whether or not the families and the kind of the school systems, if they jive well, and I guess that's where lawyers come involved to the extent that there's a disagreement between the two.
Yes.
Is there sometimes, are you involved in determining whether or not somebody qualifies or not? Meaning, is that ever a disagreement whether somebody does qualify for some type of special education and has the ability to apply for that or not?
Yes, and we get those often in cases where a student is performing well academically, where they're getting pretty decent grades, A, B, occasional C. And we get a lot of confusion about what the eligibility is required. A lot of school districts believe that if a child is performing well academically, then they could not qualify for special education services. But in order to be eligible, you need to have a qualifying disability that adversely affects educational performance, and that goes beyond academics. Educational performance is one piece of that is academics, so you could qualify if it's impacting your grades,
right.
But you can also qualify if it's having an impact on your ability to communicate, and your ability, socialization and emotional needs. And looking at whether or not a child qualifies, you need to really look at the premise behind the Individuals with Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
And the purpose of it really is to prepare students for life after school, to become independent adults.
Yeah.
And even if a student's receiving straight A's, they still may not be able to get a job if they're not able to communicate appropriately, eye contact, those types of things.
And a question, the perfect follow-up, a child here, parent asking because their child does not qualify for IEP. So what steps of action can they take if their child does not qualify?
So once a referral's made, the school district decides whether or not we're going to even test the child. And they may say this child isn't even eligible to be tested.
Right.
We don't think they would qualify anyway. So that's where a dispute potentially arises. We don't get a lot of that. The second is where the school district has actually conducted all of the testing and evaluations, come together as an eligibility committee and decided the child doesn't qualify. At that point in time, if the parent disagrees with it, the parent can ask for independent educational evaluations where they choose someone of their choice that meets the district's in-house criteria. And the criteria usually involves distance from the school, it could have caps on the amount that the independent provider is charging, things like that.
When we come back, because I know we're getting ready to go to break here, I want to talk about the IEPs. And if you do qualify, if you do have a qualifying disability, what the IEP is all about and why that's kind of critically important to make sure that your child's getting the right care and education.
Yeah, all right, we're stepping aside our first break of the evening. As we do so, a reminder, an attorney standing by live right now to speak with you. Take advantage of that. Also, you can find the firm of Hollis Wright on Facebook if you'll search the term Hollis Wright. Also on Twitter, it is Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
Welcome back into The Attorneys, an important conversation we're having. We'd love to have you be a part of this conversation. To do so, call, text, email. That information you'll find there at the bottom of the screen.
When we went to break, I mentioned that I wanted to talk about the individualized educational plans, the IEPs. But before we get there, let me ask you this. Is there a certain age that your child is not eligible for this type of special education? I mean, where he has to reach a certain age?
Well, if you're talking about individualized education programs, that starts at the age of 3.
Okay.
Prior to that, you have early intervention services, but that's not a formal specialized education program. And it goes from age 3 to 21, where you are eligible for an IEP. And it's 20, if you start school when you're 21, you can go to the end of the school year. It doesn't end right when you turn 21.
All right, so let's talk, if somebody has a qualifying disability, they are eligible for special education in Alabama, how does the IEP process work and why is that important?
When the IEP process, so it's a series of team meetings. So you have a team of professionals that comprise your IEP. That develop and design the individualized education program. So at every IEP meeting, the people that absolutely have to be there, you have to have a special education teacher, you have to have a general education teacher, and you have to have it's called an LEA, it's an acronym, local education agent. And that person is extremely important. That's the person that has to have knowledge of the resources that are available and also the authority to commit those resources. So those are the 3 school people, agents that absolutely need to be at every single IEP meeting. And the parents are a critical component of the IEP team. And there are huge safeguards available that have been made available in the IDEA to ensure full parental participation.
And are those 3 individuals, is every school required to have all 3 of them, or is that district-wide requirements?
Well, every IEP meeting needs to have those 3 people, but they don't always have to be 3 separate people.
Oh, okay.
So you could have one person acting, wearing all 3 hats, so to speak.
Yeah. Can I just a quick follow-up on that, as just to how we're doing in terms of dealing with special education programs and IEP issues. Since you've been here and you've been involved, have you seen progress? Are we doing better, you think, educationally, especially public education-wise?
I have in the time that I've been practicing, especially with individual school systems, right. Because we'll have a year where we have a lot of similar complaints against a particular school system, and then the following year, nothing. And we really use that as a gauge for whether schools are making improvements. And when we do get back involved with the school system, I am seeing a lot of improvements there. So, this area is so rewarding to see that happening.
Well, I know you do a lot of this because it's rewarding, but just so the viewers know, if they needed to get a lawyer like yourself involved, Gina, how does a lawyer get compensated in circumstances where there is a disagreement between the school system and the family related to special education services?
Well, the statute that governs special education law, the people who created the law realize that a lot of these families don't have the means to hire an attorney. So there's a provision in there that as a parent, if you have a legitimate dispute with a school system and you file a due process complaint that entitles you to a hearing in front of an independent, neutral hearing officer, and you prevail on your claim, which means that your claim had merit, you're entitled to reimbursement of all or part of your attorney fees.
So that's how you end up getting compensated in those circumstances. So give us some examples of cases that you've seen. What are the most prominent type cases that you see in this arena?
It really varies year to year. Right now, I would say we're seeing a lot of behavioral related cases where, we have a lot of students who are getting really good grades, and yet they have a lot of behaviors in the classroom where they're distracting other students. Maybe they're not paying attention to the teacher. Maybe they're getting up and walking around. So, even though that's not showing an effect yet on the grade, at some point it's going to break down. They're not going to be learning in the classroom.
Well, I noticed the firm fact that we came in from commercial break indicated that a child that qualifies with a disability can't necessarily be disciplined the same way the child that does not have a disability. Is that something you do see?
We see that quite a bit, where you have this really a conflict really between a school trying to enforce its code of conduct and students with disabilities are entitled to protections. And the protection is that a student should not be punished because of a disability. And some of these disabilities manifest in behaviors.
Right.
And if you're punishing for that behavior, you're essentially punishing the student because of a disability. So the law provides all kinds of protections for students with disabilities, that they're procedural safeguards, ways to get a hearing if the parents disagree with any punishment. We have professionals that go into school to find out why is a student behaving in this way. Are there supports we can put into place to minimize those behaviors or teach the student new skills? And then you have, a lot of times schools will create behavior intervention plans where we're actually providing supports in the classroom to hopefully curb the behaviors and give the student better ways of responding to situations.
I know we're about to go to commercial break. When we come back, I do want to talk a little bit about when a family comes into a school system for the first time, whether it's pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, what they should expect insofar as it relates to special educators in their school system, to make sure that that's being properly handled and managed from their school systems perspective.
That's a good place to pick up. We'll do that whenever we return. As we head to break, a reminder, we'd love to have you be a part of the conversation, an entire segment remaining. So take advantage of the opportunity to join us here and let your voice be heard. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright. If you've ever served on a jury, you may have wondered why there are gaps in the evidence you're given at trial. In today's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, is there insurance to pay the verdict? Know this, just because the lawyers never mention insurance in a trial, it doesn't mean there's not insurance to pay the verdict. Rule 4-in-1 of the Alabama Rules of Evidence states this: evidence that a person was or was not insured against liability is generally not admissible or allowed to be discussed at trial in front of a jury. The reason for the rule is simple. A jury could award more money in a case if they knew the defendant had insurance to pay for it. But the reality in our state is this. In almost all lawsuits that get to a trial, insurance is there to pay judgments on the property. For example, all automobiles in Alabama are required to have liability insurance. Coverage can range from $25,000 up to $1 million in these cases. In theory, all car crash cases that get to trial should have insurance available to pay any verdict awarded in death. Trucks have to carry anywhere from $750,000 to $5 million worth of insurance. Unfortunately, you'll never hear that during the trial. Even in medical malpractice cases, the doctor has liability insurance to help pay a judgment. That's something you won't hear during trial because the rules just don't allow that testimony. Yet almost all judgments against the doctor involve liability insurance. Please remember your call, email, or text to the attorney is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our promise and pledge to you.
Special education in Alabama, the topic of conversation tonight. Just a few minutes remaining if you'd like to join our conversation. Also, just a few minutes remaining if you would like to take advantage of the opportunity to speak live with an attorney who's standing by right now. Josh?
All right, so when we went out to break, I want to talk a little bit about what a family, when they have a kindergarten, first grader, or they move to a new school district, what they should expect insofar as it relates to special educators in their community. Is there a certain requirement where there has to be a certain amount of special educators or a certain qualified special educators? How does that work?
Are you talking about when a student transfers to a new school district?
Sure.
Because there are requirements that when a student, your IEP travels with you.
Okay.
The individualized education plan travels with the student. That's why it's so important. We put on a lot of seminars throughout the year to teach parents, really how to get that language in a solid form so that if they do travel, that it's understandable to the new, school system. But it travels with the student. So on day one of the student being in the new school district, the IEP needs to be followed to a T. And it's followed until the new school district has the ability to conduct. It could either rely on the IEP and say we're adopting it as is, or the school district may decide, well, we want to do some more testing and see if we need to change anything. So until a new IEP is developed, the new school district is obligated to follow that existing IEP.
Is the IEP done yearly? Is that how it works, or is it done?
At a minimum.
At a minimum.
It has to be done at least once a year.
Okay.
Parents, anybody can call an IEP team meeting as often as they like. And we encourage, if a parent calls me with a dispute, that's normally the first thing I advise them to do is to bring your team together and let the team know what your concerns are.
Do you think a lot of the breakdown happens where people get frustrated at just lack of communication? Is that a lot of what it is, where it sounds like you've recommended a couple times, even in this show, it's a good idea to get your team together and let's communicate through the problem. Is it lack of communication, you think? I
can tell you that is a big source of complaints, where parents will call and say, the school isn't doing these things, they're not following the IEP, they're not providing these services, and when we get together at the table, the school district will provide me all of this paperwork to show that yes, we have been doing those things, right. But they never communicated that to the parents. So there was a perceived difficulty there that didn't exist in reality.
Now, Gina, in this community that we live in the Birmingham area, and obviously the viewing audience is much broader than that, there are private schools everywhere across our state. Do private schools that are not publicly funded or wholly publicly funded, do they have an obligation to have a special education program?
No, they are not responsible to comply with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, a lot of the time, if you have a student with a eligible for an IEP that is in private school, they can get funding or services through the local public school system. Now, it's not going to be to the same extent, but each school district sort of calculates how many funds they have available to provide students that are in private schools. It could be something as simple as speech services or occupational therapy services.
I've heard a lot in the special education realm, this concept of least restrictive environment. Can you kind of unwrap that just a little bit and explain what that means?
Sure. Students with disabilities are entitled to be educated in what's called their least restrictive environment. The acronym for that is LRE. That's what you'll hear quite a bit. And there's a continuum of alternative placements. So the very least restrictive environment is the general education classroom with their peers. Students cannot be segregated solely because of a disability. That's discriminatory. So if a school district wants to propose a more restrictive setting, that could be a specialized classroom, a specialized school, homebound programming, residential programming. Before they propose that more restrictive setting, they need to exhaust their efforts to modify the class material, provide accommodations, provide supplementary aids and services. And when they've done that, they've used their best efforts to educate a student with those supports in the general classroom. It's not working. Then they can propose a more restrictive setting.
We're just about out of time. We've flown through this topic, but a timely conversation. But from both of you, just a final thought, Gina, we'll start with you. A final thought and closing comments for our viewers.
I think something that's very important for parents to know is that your IEP team really operates by consensus, and you're never, I don't know, generally parents come in with really lofty goals. They want the best program for their student, and chunking that into pieces and coming to the table with one or two things that you really feel are necessary, and calling IEP meetings frequently, you know, just to gauge progress, to see if your student's making progress or not making progress. Do changes need to be made? And if you have a disagreement, you know, take a recess and come back after everybody's had time to kind of, cool off and continue that effort to reach a consensus.
We bring the experts on. Yeah. She's the expert. I mean, you know, if you have an issue, it sounds like communication is the key. It starts there with your team and making sure as a parent that you're communicating with the team to ensure and maintain that the goals that have been set and collaborated on are being followed. If not, you've got experts like Gina. Text us, email us, call us. We can get you in touch with an expert like this at no cost to make sure that you're being led, guided, and directed through the right path.
Yeah, timely, valuable conversation tonight. A reminder, if someone you needs to watch this show, send them to the website. That's hollis-wright.com. We'll have the website there on this show on The Attorneys. We'll see you next time. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.